until the Mongols, the names of the Chinese dynasties were actually place names, different from the name of the ruling house.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In fact, it's never been, even when you have a new kind of name, which is sort of more ideological, a quality name, like the Yuan or the Ming or the Qing, it's never the name of the ruling house. So the Ming dynasty is the Zhu family, right?
Right.
The Han dynasty is the Liu family. It's strange because you would think that somehow the family, and since it's so much part of the government, would have its name there, but it doesn't.
Right, like the Tudors or the Stuarts.
Yes, indeed.
But these names start to mean something in the Yuan, right?
Yes, that's right. These are names. We're not always sure exactly what they meant, but we know that they meant something. That they were meant to refer to some quality. Dynasty is a period of time, and it's a ruling house. What happens when the emperor is a baby and comes to the throne? I mean, he's the successor, and he's a child. He can't rule.
No, but he has a regent.
Ah.
There may be an empress dowager, for example, as in the late 19th century. But more commonly a regent.
Right.
But the question of succession is always at the heart of the longevity or short-livedness of a dynasty.
Right. You know, there's when we talk about successors, they're all male.
Yes.
Right? But there was one female empress in Chinese history who created her own dynasty. That was Wu Zetian. In the middle of the Tang dynasty, she ends the Tang and creates her own dynasty. She calls it the Zhou. Then with her death, she's out. But it did happen once.
She has a complex history. But the rule of female leaders is one in which, since most Chinese history has been written by men, at least until very recently. Take, for example, the woman who actually ruled China from about 1860 to her death in 1908, the Empress Dowager. In part because she was a woman, she has a terrible historical reputation. And I remember, you may remember, I used to have a picture of her, a wonderful portrait of the Empress Dowager outside of my office in University Hall when I was dean of the faculty at Harvard. And the Chinese ambassador once came and looked at this picture and said, "Why do you have this picture of this terrible woman outside of your office?" And I said to him, with all due respect, Mr. Ambassador, if it weren't for her, you might not have a country. She kept the country together so that others...
That actually brings us to a really important point, that we use the name of a dynasty also to refer to the territory. Right? Not just the time period, but also the territorial extent. The time period has a beginning and end, but the territory waxes and wanes.
Of course.
That we can, as you'll see here on these maps, during the course of the Tang dynasty, there's tremendous differences in the extent of control. Dynasty is also a government. So China's a big place. How do they impose government over that territory of that size?
Well, there isn't a single dynasty that came to power by elections, at least so far. Dynasties conquer or fight their way to power, and they maintain their rule in part by military force. That is inevitable virtually for any state. They maintain their power also through bureaucracy and a regularized system of governance. They maintain it through this vast and differentiated empire also by common patterns of thought, at least among the elite, by ideology, for lack of a better word, by Confucian and other schools of thought that are part of the official...
Well, it's part of the official education. Right?
Part of the official education through the examination system, which chooses the best and the brightest men of the realm to serve the court on the basis of shared learning in the Chinese classics, on the assumption that if you memorize, study, and can make eloquent sense of the classics of civilization, you will therefore be a better person and better able to govern. It's a great way of ruling a vast empire on the cheap.
Right. One aspect of this is that there's a field administration, the provinces, prefectures, and counties, but that the government then is appointing those leading officials to those levels. It's much more like the French system, the old French system, where it's centralized appointment rather than local selection, local appointment.
That's correct, of course.
Chinese history has been divided up really until the 20th century when the Western calendar is sometimes adopted. But it's been divided up into dynasties. But there are other ways of dividing up the historical past, other kinds of periodization. We could talk about archaeology, for example, which looks at the materials used to make tools, Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age.
And you could look at different Western ways of organizing time for China and for the rest of the world. Marx's idea of moving from a feudal to a capitalist to a socialist society.
We've talked about times in terms of dynasties. Dynasties tend to be thought of as cyclical. They have beginnings, middles, and ends, and then they repeat. Versus a notion of progressive change, that every period is going to be an advance on the earlier period. And where I think we end up in this course is thinking about time not so much as cyclical or progressive as cumulative and advancing, gradually building things up and changing over time. We can also speak in Chinese history about social time, that is the time that people actually live their lives on a day-to-day basis. And that does seem to be very cyclical. The agricultural year is very much a solar year, and it's divided into 24 periods, and each has 15 days. The calendar, right, is a lunar calendar where you have 12 moons or 12 months, and they each have X number of days. They're 29 and a half days each. And so you have some days 29 days, some 30 days to make it work. You have to add in an extra month every 7 years to bring the lunar calendar back into sync with the solar calendar. Solar calendar is essential for agriculture. The other thing that is, and this goes back to at least as far back as writing goes, that is at least 1200 BC, is something called the sexagenary cycle. You can see them on the screen now. One set of 12, one set of 10, so that if you match them, you get a cycle of 60 before it repeats.
Right.
And that cycle of 60, sometimes called the Jiazi, the name for the first of the 60 sets, is a very important cycle. Has been for as long as we know in Chinese history.
Right. Confucius said, when I was 50, I could understand the will of heaven. 50 知天命. And at 60, 60 shun. My ear would be, as it has been translated, an obedient vehicle for the reception of truth. And when you're at 60, there's a good reason, because this cycle only comes around every 60 years. And when you are 60, when you have your 60th birthday, it is a time of the greatest celebration. You are supposed to have accomplished much of what you can accomplish, and it isn't that the rest is just gravy, but you are at ease.